It's been so long.
I know. I miss you guys.
All right, so Kay's going to join us online. So for now.
I was wondering about her. Is she there?
Kayla Helene, she's right here. Let's say hi to the class.
Hey guys, I miss you.
What's that? So she's sitting here. We moved her. Assigned seating.
No one wants to see Annika.
So, all right.
Bro, my legs are gone.
I can see it.
I woke up, so you take a look.
I look up, and then I look up.
My mouth. My mouth. What?
So is that visible?
Not really. Is it visible body?
Say it again.
Is that visible body?
Yeah. Can you see what I'm doing?
Not really. It just looks like shadow. Is that an arm?
Big, I know.
How's that?
Much better.
Can you see it on the computer now?
I can. Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So
No moments?
Little channel for class. That way, from here on, everything will be up to Monday's class. So I recorded for.
Yes,
all right, so cranking all this shoulder stuff, right? So let's talk about this attachment. Let's go through a refresh on what we have for the structure that stabilizes and supports this upper limb. So what is that proximal attachment of the upper extremity to the axial skeleton? What joint? The SC joint, which is what? Don't give me letters, give me the names. Sternoclavicular. Sternoclavicular joint is stabilized by what ligaments? The costoclavicular is that first tether. It's that first space that holds that clavicle to that structure. So it's still holding that clavicle into that axial skeleton. More proximal to that, what do we have? The anterior, posterior sternoclavicular ligaments. Reinforcements of that joint capsule. And what's the third one? Or the fourth one? The fourth one that goes over the jugular notch. The interclavicular ligament, right? So we've got a whole big series of 4 principal ligaments that are helping to keep all of this tight and controlled. So it doesn't go anywhere. Because remember, if I show you what's behind it, we don't want it to go there. Because behind it is, well, danger. Danger in runs. Okay, so what type of joint do we have here? Saddle. Saddle joint. So that clavicle on the proximal end is kind of a stubby thing, right? It's bigger, it's fatter. It's got a little bit of an arc to it, so it can articulate around that curved surface on the manubrium. How many degrees of elevation do we get out of that SC joint? 30. 30 degrees of elevation. Because that clavicle can lift up 30 degrees from that horizontal plane. Good. So let's move distal to that. Then what is that next joint? The AC joint. What bones are we connecting with the AC joint? The scapula with the clavicle. So what does AC stand for if we're going scapula to clavicle? The acromioclavicular, the acromion process, which is an extension of what landmark on the scapula? The acromion is an extension of what landmark? What other structure?
Oh,
The spine of the scapula, right? So we find it easiest by going spine, which is pretty pronounced on the back, trace it forward, and it flattens out into that acromion process. So the acromion into the clavicle, then, both of those ends are kind of flat, and they butt up against each other. That acromion wraps around, and the clavicle just kind of slides into the side. What kind of joint is it? Gliding. So we have a joint capsule wrapping around a gliding joint that's supposed to be holding and suspending the entire weight of our upper arm. It's a crappy way to go about doing things. So what is the principal stability to help keep this thing together? What ligament then is responsible for creating that support, that elevation, that distal tether? The coracoclavicular ligament, coracoid process to the clavicle. There's two parts to that coracoclavicular ligament. What are they? The trapezoid, which is more anterior, not the trapezius muscle. The trapezoid part and the conoid part. Good? Seems like a vague memory some back from 2 days ago. All right. There's also the AC ligament. So the acromioclavicular ligament is that joint capsule. And again, it's just not a very reliable structure. It doesn't have the leverage to hold that weight up. So it stabilizes the joint. It helps. But that tether, that distal tether, that coracoclavicular ligament is what we need to help hold that whole system up. Okay, so backtrack, because I know we didn't do palpations on this. What I want you to do, find the point of your shoulder, the tip of your shoulder, find that outward extension of the acromion. Drop down over that joint line to where you're kind of in that little bit of a gap in between the humeral head and that acromion, and then get down on top of that greater tuberosity. Walk your fingers anteriorly, and all of a sudden, right when you get, if you externally rotate, you'll get to that intertubercular groove. If you keep going, you'll get to the lesser tuberosity. And if you keep coming forward, all of a sudden you roll off of the humeral head and you get kind of this little crook, this little soft squishy spot. You keep going, you get up on ribs. So there's this one little gap in here that's in between humeral head and the ribs. Good? So get your finger on that gap. And I want you to extend your arm. And all of a sudden that gap gets hard. It gets filled in with something. So that's the coracoid process tipping forward anteriorly. That fills in that space under your fingers. Pretty cool, huh? So to find it, you need to put them in extension. You need to tip that scapula forward to find that spot. Okay, so that's, okay, well, next step is then getting into the glenohumeral joint. So what are the principal ligaments that are reinforcements of the joint capsule that help stabilize the glenohumeral joint? Superior, middle, inferior glenohumeral ligaments. And the inferior glenohumeral ligament is like a hammock. It rests, it cradles underneath the humeral head to hold it up. With what motion do we make that inferior glenohumeral ligament taut, tight, stretched? So inferior glenohumeral ligament cradles underneath that humeral head. What motion do I need to do? What motion does it restrict? What motion do I need to do to make it tight? Abduction. Why? Why does moving this bone away from that ligament make it tight? What happens? So we had this conversation all the time about how when we move this joint, this ball and socket, as it rolls, it wants to go up. It's going to go out of that glenoid. So it has to translate down. It slides down. As it slides down, you can see that it's going to create that stretch down. It's going to put stretch on it as we roll that away. Right? So then what motion does the middle glenohumeral ligament restrict?
Abduction.
Horizontal. Use your big words. Horizontal abduction. Exactly. That's what he said. Right? Horizontal abduction. Okay, so horizontal abduction. Good? Feeling okay with that? There's another ligament that helps reinforce a little bit of that middle glenohumeral ligament. Goes from coracoid process across. What ligament is that that helps reinforce middle glenohumeral?
Is that the superior?
What's another ligament that we've chatted about? Coracohumeral ligament. Coracohumeral ligament's going, again, coracoid process, you can find it, across to the humeral head. And so if I go into abduction, if I pull back, it's going to give me that restriction. External rotation, abduction. It's going to get taut, tight, stretched. Good? What else have we discussed? Give me another ligament. What's another ligament that comes off a coracoid process? How many did we have? I like lists. You should remember them. Not yet. So we had 4. Well, 3, but there's condyloid and trapezoid, so that makes 4, right? So 2 parts to one of them. So what's the last one? What's the last one that we've not talked about yet? Coracoacromial. Why is coracoacromial ligament funky? It's scapula to scapula, so it's not crossing the joint. It's the roof to the joint. It's the ceiling. So as that humeral head, as the humerus goes up, it's the roof that kind of gives leverage to push it down, to guide it down, to help it translate downward. So it functions to stabilize it by somewhat creating a softer socket, a version of the acetabulum, of that acetabular bony structure in the hip. So we had 2 other small little ligaments in our system as well. What are those ligaments? Transverse humeral. What does it do? Where is it going? What is its function in life? It holds down biceps. Which one? Long head. Biceps long head runs through which passageway? Which osteolandmark? The intertubercular groove. Right? So the tuberosity. You've got greater tuberosity out wide. Inside, you've got lesser, and in between the two, the intertubercular groove. Long head runs right through it. Smush it with your fingers, feel it, love it, hate it, whatever. Transverse covers that so that it doesn't slip out. Regardless of the degree of rotation, it stays in place. What's the last one that we have? Zoom into our scapula here, roll ourselves up top, and you got this little nook, this little hole on the top of the scapula. You've got the superior transverse ligament. What goes through that passageway?
Nerve.
Suprascapular nerve. Above the scapular nerve. It goes through the suprascapular notch, which is an osteolandmark. There is, at this moment, a whole lot of you who are hoping to avoid eye contact as you bury yourself in notes. It's a reflection that what we did on Monday wasn't reviewed enough for today. We're covering 13 muscles today. That tends to be a chunk. It's 26 origin insertions with 13 actions. And if you're not confident and comfortable with that osteo, then you're behind already. And your work is more difficult. So where you looked at grades on exam 1, exam 2, where you're looking at what you need on exam 3 and final, be concerned, be proactive, and get on it. I want to help. I want to see you succeed. I don't want to see you in the summer. So we have this weekend to get caught up once we get through all of this. Okay? All right. Furthermore, we discussed rotator cuff. We kind of jumped into it for the sake of you've heard of it. you know of it, and so we kind of played with it some as well. What's the secondary function of the rotator cuff beyond rotation? How else is it important in a way that we probably understate a lot? So why do we have a UIW hat that's green? I mean, we're red and
Oh,
black.
this is for St. Patrick's Day last year.
Oh, okay. So the San Antonio Missions,
Oh, yeah.
they're changing their mascot this summer. I'm there. Like whatever they want to sell me, I will buy it with the chocolates. Like they're going to be the San Antonio chocolate. No, I'll do it with the hat.
The flying chocolate.
Yeah. The flying chocolates, yeah, the flying samples.
It's a little racist.
I'm there. It's mine.
I'm kind of want to go.
I'm good for a gimmick. I'm good for it. All right, so rotator cuff. What is its secondary function? What else is it doing? I mean, this scapula is nothing but one massive landmark for anchoring rotator cuff muscles. Supraglenoid fossa, supraspinous fossa, infraspinous fossa, subscapular fossa. Huge spaces. Teres minor coming off like the middle, takes half out of the middle, but the middle half of that lateral border. Huge muscles that are creating rotation, yes, but what else? Collectively, what are they doing together? Stabilize the humeral head, right? Because they're coming off the scap, so they're reaching around to grab that humeral head, creating compression. They're holding it in joint. So we had all those ligaments we just ran through, but then we also have this added dynamic stability of the rotator cuff reaching around from different angles and just creating compression to hold it in space. All right. Fastest pitch ever thrown. How fast? 105. Wow. It's like a whopping 1.8% off a person. No, so it's incredibly fast. There's a video of it on the website, I'm pretty sure. Look at it, watch it, because it's a biomechanical breakdown of how this guy does that. Because it's insane, the mechanics behind creating that amount of rotational acceleration to put a ball that fast. It's so cool. And every one of those muscles, deltoid, biceps, every one of those bits of acceleration are anchored and coming off and around that scapula. Man, like the humeral head has to be positioned and go through all of that off of the platform that is the scapula. So, mental image time. Right? Close your eyes. I want you to close your eyes. What are you going to do? Just like no trust. What you going to do? Spray silly string at me or something? All right, so cannon. Big, steel, massive cannon. Take a big old fat cannonball and drop it down the chamber. Fire that cannon, boom, at this concrete wall you're trying to knock down. Big boom, big cannonball. Now take that big old cannon and mentally stick it in a canoe on a lake and try to fire that thing again. We have problems? Probably so. Right? So think of the cannon that fires a 105-mile-an-hour fastball and have this be on a canoe or this be a canoe. If this isn't stable, if that scapula isn't stable, there's no way the humerus can do what it needs to do. So first list for today, 6. 6 muscles for scapular stabilization. Okay, so how many muscles? First one that we're going to chat about is the one we've taken off like a dozen times now. Very, very prominent, very easy to find. We've got the trapezius. Large muscle, occiput down to T12. Superior nuchal line, the back of the occipital bone, occiput running down the spinous processes to T12. Just above the lumbar spine. It's massive, that's long. It inserts as it kind of converges across the spine of the scapula. Now, pay attention to the direction of the fibers. Even though it's just an artist's rendition in this version, you've got fibers that are going from the occiput down to the spine. You've got some that are going from C3, C4, T1, T2 going straight across into the spine. You've got T8 through 12 that are rising up into the spine. So if any given one of those fibers individually, it's going to have a different effect on where the scapula moves. Okay, so let's pause for a second. Where can it move? Scapula sits smack across the back. Get rid of you. So scapula sits there. It's got this rounded rib cage. So that rib cage is already turning away from that frontal plane as it's resting there. Take your arm out. Do a shoulder punch. You can shift it forward. So that is right there. That is scapular protraction. You can protract it, wrap it around that rib cage where the arm shifts anteriorly. Pull it back, retraction. Pulling that medial border back in towards the spine of the scap, retracts it back in. You shrug your shoulders. Elevation, it's just directly lifting it upwards. Relax, gravity drops it back down. You fire those inferior fibers or those traps, and it's going to assist with pulling it down. Find your neighbor. Have them turn around from you. Face away. Good, so I want you to get that inferior angle, that medial border present itself. What body position do you need for that? We did that, right? So internal rotation. Tuck that arm behind the small of the back. That's going to present that medial border more pronounced so you can find it. I want you to take your hand, run that index finger along the medial border. The web of your thumb sits on the inferior angle, and your thumb rides up that lateral border. Have them elevate. Have them shoulder shrug. And you can feel that scap pull away from your hand. Kelly, you want to work with something? I'd like you to feel it. So elevate, feel it rise up, depress, watch it fall back down in line. Shoulder punch, go here. Anterior shoulder punch. Now once you find it, you can have them move, but then they can move anteriorly, and you can feel it slide around towards under your hand even more. You can feel it shift, protract. Pull back, you can feel it retract. You should feel more pressure of that medial border pushing into your index finger. So Gabriel, go here and here. Yep, there you go, protraction, retraction. Okay, now find it, make sure you've got a hold of it. Make sure you've got those borders really nice. And then have them abduct. What's it doing when you abduct? Up how? Discuss. Is it the same as elevation of shoulder shrug? That inferior angle moves. What is that kind of movement is that? Where's it going? What's it doing? What's that? Sort of. What's happening with that inferior angle? Where's it going? How do you describe that differently than protraction? Because it's not going outward the same way, is it? What's it doing? It's rotating. So that rotation is that last piece, because as you feel it, as you go up, that scapula, the glenoid, the presentation of the glenoid rotates upward with the humeral head. So we have elevation, depression. We have protraction, retraction. We have upward rotation, downward rotation. All of that is being facilitated by the 6 muscles that we're chatting about. Good? So that trapezius, if I fire my middle fibers, it's going to retract it back in towards the spine. It's going to facilitate pulling it back in. If I fire the upper fibers, it's going to assist with elevation, with that shoulder shrug. If I fire my lower fibers, it's going to create, beyond just gravity, it's going to create depression. But likewise, if you look at that angle of pull, those lower fibers can create rotation. It can create a rotation that helps face that glennon. Or if I fire my upper fibers, then it's going to, if I fire some of my middle fibers, I can downward rotate at the same time. So you see that the traps are so very dynamic because they can move the majority of the directions this thing goes. Rotation, elevation, depression, just depending on which section you're firing. So let's get rid of them. Okay, next one. Next pair. Number 2, number 3. Rhomboid major, rhomboid minor. So rhomboid minor is the one that sits right above it, that thin little band. C7, T1, right here. T2 through 4, T2 through 5. Goes into the medial border. What's it going to do? What's its job? What's its function? So it's going to grab that medial border and retract it back in towards the spine. Good? Easy enough. Superior angle. Moving our way around. Transverse processes of C1 through C4. So high up in here on the side, going straight down into that superior angle. Levator scapula. It levates it, elevates it, it lifts it up. Levator scapula. So traps, number 1, rhomboid major, minor, number 2 and 3. Levator scap, number 4. So number 5 is a little bit funky. It's kind of hard to find sometimes. So we're going to grab that image. Bodybuilder. You look at these guys right in through here on that lateral aspect. It's like underneath that right pec, they've got these like finger-like projections coming off. Ribs 2 through 7. So it's coming off anterolaterally, and it wraps back around to grab onto the medial, the anterior surface of the medial border of that scapula. Bless you. But that's a long trip. It's a funky line of pull. It's like going from here through that body to grab the other side. That is retraction. So it's sliding that thing around, sliding that scapula anteriorly around while holding it into the thoracic cage. And that's the next secondary piece of it, though, is that it is keeping it hugged, snug, up against that thoracic wall, against those ribs. It is principally responsible for holding that scapula into the thoracic wall. The trapezius muscle inserts most posteriorly across the spine of the scap, which is actually elevated off of the plane of that scapula. Rhomboid major, minor are going into the plane of that scap, into the scapular main bone. Levator scaps grabbing the top of it to lift it. The only thing that holds it snug flush against your rib cage is serratus anterior. Good? Very important secondary piece, and we'll come back to that momentarily. So last one, I'm gonna flip my dude around. Pec major. Kick it out of the way. And hiding underneath pec major is pec minor. So ridge, 3, 4, and 5. It goes up into that coracoid process. So if you take your arm, take your shoulder, and you can tip it forward, rotate it forward. That's pec minor grabbing coracoid process and tipping the whole scapula anteriorly. So it tips it forward. That's very easy to forget this guy because it's the only one that's not visible from the posterior side. You're going to see the scap from the back, and you're going to go, okay, so traps, rhomboid major, minor, levator scap. Oh, that's straight anterior. That's right, because it kind of touches on the side. It's number 6. It's number 6, and you get stressed out. And it's on the anterior side. It's on the other side. Change your perspective. Good to go. So if this tips it forward, what pulls it back? What is the opposite of that anterior tipping of that scapula? What muscle then has line of pull to bring that inferior angle back down and in? If it's lifted off and tipping, then what's bringing it back? So serratus and lower traps. Lower traps, you're going to grab in here and pull it back down and in. Pull those, the bottom inferior angles, those shoulder blades together.
What did you say? Lower traps and what?
Well, serratus will assist, but I would say lower traps.
Lower traps. Okay.
Okay, so what are my side conversations that get into ortho more than you want to right now? Shoulder injuries. Shoulder injury, you tend to find an inhibition for whatever reason of serratus anterior. So we have a dislocation, a slap lesion, a subluxation. We have some kind of significant trauma in here. And all of a sudden we have a problem in which serratus anterior doesn't want to come out plain. So what principal motion are we now weakened in, loose, lacking? What does serratus do? Protraction. Okay, so it's not working for protraction. What's its secondary function? What else did it do? What was that secondary piece that it did? It's holding, yeah, it's taking that medial border and it's pulling that whole scapula into the thoracic cage. So we kind of have to have that happening. So your body's then going to try to compensate somehow. Its compensation is going to come from your rhomboids. Your rhomboids are then going to fire because they're the only other thing grabbing on that medial border that can try to help hold it in, but they don't have leverage. They don't have line of pull for that. Unless they just really lock down to stop any kind of motion. But their job is what? What are the rhomboids supposed to be doing for us? They're supposed to be doing retraction, which is the opposite serratus anterior. So we're now using the muscle that is opposite of the serratus to do the serratus's work. There's a whole lot of wonky with that. So we've lost protraction. We're overusing retraction, all to try to compensate to hold the scapula into the thoracic wall. Now the piece that's supposed to help dynamically retract is rhomboids. So the traps then have to kick in to help facilitate some of that. But the traps are much more dynamic in general. They're supposed to do elevation, depression, rotation, retraction. So if we lock them down to try to hold on to just that retraction piece, we tend to get more issues. Anybody here ever have a shoulder injury? You're up. Come on up. When and where? When?
Sublux one.
When was that? 3 years ago? We'll see if it still works. Whichever. Okay. Yep, that's fine. All right, left shoulder. Okay, shoulder punch. Up. Good. Hold it there now. Hold it there now. Push it down. You got him close to the table. Let's try this one. And that's my body weight. So 3 years ago, he subluxed. It's been 3 years. I can throw half my body weight into his right arm and I can't budge him. Left arm, I can get almost to the table without straining nearly as hard. So sit up and face the screen. So what we get then is left shoulder history. I guarantee you we're going to have some pretty good tightness going on right in there. Yeah? One thumb, one place, wrong with me. You're welcome. Here to help. Next piece, here we get tension headaches. Like right about there. So upper trap sitting around C4, C5 because they're compensating for rhomboids. Now he has tension and pain up here. How do you fix it? You fix serratus anterior. You reactivate it. Do some release work on rhomboids. And all of a sudden, magically, his neck feels worlds better. No more tension headaches, no more stress, no more tightness. All because we focus on what needs to be done to help fix that structure. So what's secondarily happening, though? We are completely making the platform that his left arm works on dysfunctional. He's not throwing 105-mile fastballs left-handed. You're right-handed. So we have secondary problems of potential impingement. We have secondary problems of further issues, degradation of the rotator cuff as it slides in and around that area underneath that acromion. We have other problems that are come because this platform is no longer stable. It's doing all kinds of funky wonky things. Good? Let's go fix it. See, now he's leaving. I'm done with this. Don't touch me again, dude.
Too much information.
Adios.
Hey, good luck. All right, so 6 muscles of scapular stabilization. Trapezius, rhomboid major, rhomboid minor, levator scap. Serratus anterior. With a fun star because you're not allowed to forget it ever. And then what's the one I keep missing?
Pec minor.
Pec minor, pectoralis minor. Good? All right, so that scapula, on rotation, can rotate as much as 60 degrees. 60. Good to know. How many degrees, because I forgot to ask, how many degrees of elevation do we get at the AC joint? AC, acromioclavicular. How many do we get? 30. Excuse me. Okay. So now let's chat about moving some of this stuff. So we're going to look at the shoulder itself, the glenohumeral joint. Now, the rotator cuff, the rotator cuff starting off, it moves the glenohumeral joint. It gives compression to that glenohumeral joint. I'm going to reference what I call glenohumeral movers, which are going to create the majority of the rest of my motions. I get that rotator cuff are also moving glenohumeral joint. But for the sake of creating groups and classifying things together, we just kind of separate them off. So glenohumeral movers, for everything else that we're going to move, there are 7 muscles. 3 in the front, 3 in the back, 1 over the top. So we'll start with the top because it's kind of a cap that covers everything. So that's deltoid. Deltoid has 3 different bellies. It has anterior, middle, posterior. If you look up at the screen, you'll see how the clavicle coming up into the acromion kind of creates this V shape, and the deltoid originates all around that shape. So the anterior deltoid is coming off of the anterior clavicle. The posterior delta is coming off the acromion and the spine of the scap. The middle delt comes over the AC joint. It comes off of the distal clavicle and the acromion. Easy enough. Fire all 3 of those together, we get abduction. So turn sideways. Take your arm, your elbow, and push it out into your table. Do abduction with resistance. And you're getting traction of that deltoid because it creates that abduction, right? Okay, so I want you to feel it though. Feel the contour, the curvature in that contraction, and feel it down to the singular point of attachment on your lateral humerus. So get that contraction, feel the curvature of the muscle as it comes into the lateral humerus, and then relax. And then slide your finger around on that bone, and you'll feel a little bit of a bump. Subtle, but there. It's called your deltoid tuberosity. It is the insertion of your deltoid. Conveniently named. So all findable. Play palpable. That was comfortable. Got it? Maybe. There. There. That's right. Got it? You're hot. So find your deltoid. You can feel that coming through there. Deltoid tuberosity. Right there. Got it? Okay. So we fire anterior deltoid and we start getting anterior motions. Anterior motions, forward flexion, horizontal adduction. On posterior motions, posterior fibers, posterior belly of the deltoid, and we get extension and horizontal abduction. So those motion pairs, forward flexion, horizontal adduction, for all of our other three anterior muscles, we'll get those pairs. Let's kick it all off. Deltoid gone. Deltoid gone. Deltoid gone. So let's go. Oops. Just kidding. We'll come over here. So first anterior muscle, pectoralis major. Big, broad, massive muscle. All up the sternum. Cross that manubrium. Across into the first half, the proximal half of your clavicle. Big muscle. Convergent, big fan, wide band to start, comes out into a point. Remember that intertubercular groove? It inserts on the floor of that. It inserts into the intertubercular groove. A couple things do. Principal motion, again, is that horizontal adduction, push-ups, bench press, bringing that humerus in line with that sagittal plane. Following that transverse plane into bringing that frontal into sagittal. Good? Now, it's such a broad muscle that it's got more actions, more lines of pull. So if you're going to work it out, you've also got declined benches and inclined benches, because I want to, if you want to work the lower curvature for the sake of aesthetics, then we need to have a push that focuses on those lower fibers. Right? It's a declined bench, and you're going to push forward down towards your bottom. If you want to work on the upper fibers for that strength, you want an inclined bench when you're up in here. Good? All right. Next two. Dig off pec major, and then these get a little trickier. So there's my deltoid. There's my deltoid. And we have biceps brachia. So biceps brachii is going to be both heads. Short head originates on coracoid process. Long head originates on supraglenoid tubercle. So we need to pause a little quick second because we need to put that in frame. Supraglenoid tubercle. Another one of those that you get to add a little star on for ortho. So take my humerus and remove the fun from class. we're left looking at, oh, there it is. There's our glenoid. Supraglenoid tubercle. Supraglenoid means it's above the glenoid. Tubercle means it's a bump. So on the top of the glenoid, we have a bump from which the long head of the biceps originates. However, what do we have wrapping around the outside of that glenoid? Cartilage, what's it called? A little highlighted piece. Or the not highlighted piece, right there. The anti-highlighted piece. What's it called? Say it again? Labrum. So the glenoid's got this labrum, this cartilaginous rim around it. The acetabulum did as well. Okay? So for the long head of the biceps to originate on supraglenoid tubercle, it actually originates through the labrum. So there's a weak point in there. Weak points means we probably have a source of injury. Slap lesions, where we fire it hard enough or torque it hard enough that we peel the labrum off the bone, which destabilizes the origination of the long head of the biceps. Probably something to hold on to. You will be asked about supraglenoid tubercle. Feel free to put stars where you can. So, what bone is the supraglenoid tubercle on?
Scapula.
Scapula. What bone is the coracoid process on?
Scapula.
Scapula. You got it. So both heads of biceps brachii originate on the scapula. Both heads cross glenohumeral joint. Both heads wrap down and are both responsible for forward flexion, horizontal adduction. Both assist with anterior motions of the glenohumeral joint. Horizontal adduction, adduction, add it back in. All right, so let's go find short head, which sits right in here. Oh, just kidding. Short head, right here. And if we hide him away, sitting underneath, we have another little muscle that bands, that wraps down off of that coracoid process called the coracobrachialis, the third muscle of the anterior part. Coracobrachialis. So you can find it again. Coracoid process, right here, extend that arm, and then it goes down to about mid-shaft of the humerus. Forward flexion, horizontal adduction. Posterior side. Yes.
For the biceps, both inserts.
Yes. So we'll get into biceps and triceps for both elbow movers, flexion extension. So we will get into that a lot when we hit elbow, right? So we'll tap that hard a little bit with that insertion. So first muscle we have for posterior shoulder glenohumeral movers is going to be long head of triceps brachii. So there's a medial and a lateral head as well. Both of those originate on the shaft of the humerus. They do not cross the glenohumeral joint. So long head is the only one that does cross over. So it originates on the infraglenoid tubercle. So biceps long head, supraglenoid tubercle. Triceps long head, infraglenoid tubercle. Nice and easy. It's palpable. So if I kick off all these muscles, put them in internal rotation, put that hand behind the back so you can get that inferior angle to present itself. You can palpate your way up the lateral border, and then that infraglenoid tubercle is going to live just beneath the glenoid. So unlike the supra, it's not part of the glenoid. It is kind of underneath it as that lateral border flares out to create the glenoid. Put some muscles back on. There we go. And you can see where triceps long head originates on that inferior tuber. Good. So horizontal abduction, extension. Now triceps. So you guys weight lift, hit the gym a little bit. Triceps is a little bit frustrating. It's very easy to plateau when trying to build your tricep muscle. And the reason for that is because these three bellies all work in slightly different angles. One of them is directly related to shoulder motion. So it's easy to focus on extension and not ever work on long head, which leaves out a chunk of its motion, which means you'll only ever be as strong as your weakest leg. So there's about a dozen different tricep motions, exercises, to help make sure that you're working medial and lateral and long head of the triceps. So it helps put these in perspective of some of those conditioning exercises. All right, inferior angle. Coming across again to that intertubercular groove is teres major. So teres minor was off that lateral border, the medial aspect of the lateral border. Teres major is coming off of inferior angle and reaching out to the humerus, intertubercular groove. There you go. Bring the humor back into class. Last one, third one, latissimus dorsi. We've taken this thing off a dozen times when we went through head, neck, and spine. We finally get to have a chat. Massive, huge band of a muscle that drops its way up deep. Again, intertubercular groove. So think of the exercise for this. We've got latissimus lat pull downs, right? Lat pull down, you're coming in through here. Pull ups, you're coming through here. It's grabbing that humerus and adducting it back into the body. It's also going to give us some leverage for horizontal abduction, but it's going to be a principal adducting. Pecs are going to facilitate that as well. But lat pull downs, lat pull, pretty major construct there. So latissimus dorsi, teres major, long head of triceps in the back. Horizontal abduction and extension. Yes, ma'am.
My nuts, I don't know if it's right. I put that for lats. Also, they're not like strong sores, but they also.
They will. So again, so the latissimus dorsi and teres major are actually both coming from posterior and wrapping into that intertubercular groove. And so they're going to facilitate that internal rotation. Pec major probably more directly. And again, if you pull out some of that line of pull, then we're isolating better with subscapular. Okay. Two more commentaries to finish class. First of all, the scapula lives in existence on a rounded surface. The ribs are curved, not straight. So what plane is this? Frontal. What plane is this? Sagittal. The scapula, as our ribs curve around through each of these dynamically, we have the scapula that lives somewhere in the middle. So about 30 degrees forward of the frontal plane is what we call the plane of the scapula, where it's in its neutral middle position, resting with most of those muscles at ease. So it's not here. It's certainly not here, but it is rotated a little bit forward, about 30 degrees off of that frontal plane. It's called scaption. It's the plane, scaption, S-C-A-P-T-I-O-N, scaption. It's the plane of the scapula. Okay. Important when you guys are looking at evals doing special tests because you typically want that scapula in its neutral spot when you're looking at shoulder motion. All right. Glenohumeral motion. You can have about 120 degrees maximum of humeral motion on the glenoid in abduction. 120. So everybody take your hands. Give me a jumping jack. Go up all over your head. Yeah? How many degrees of motion is that? Nope. How many degrees of motion is that? Go straight up. 180 degrees, right? Half a circle? How many degrees did I just say that the glenohumeral motion, glenohumeral joint can do? 120. How am I not contradicting myself? Where do I get the other degrees of motion? Only 120 can come from glenohumeral joint. Where does the other degrees come from?
The elbow?
AC and SE a little bit, but where first? You felt it already. Find your partner. Find that inferior angle. Put your hand back on it. Have them go through abduction. Where did it go? Where did that scapula go? Rotating with it. So you get that other 60 degrees from scapular rotation, from the scapulothoracic articulation. It rotates, so the glenoid, the face of the glenoid rotates upward to where the humerus tracks with it. Got it? So where does that come from? I move the arm. I take my deltoid and I grab that humerus on that deltoid tuberosity. I pull it into abduction. The arm goes up. It pushes against that coracoacromial ligament. It pushes it, and as much as that's guiding the head inferiorly in translation, it's also pushing the whole scapula upwards with it in rotation. So how many degrees of rotation do we get at the scapula? I think we had that conversation earlier, right? 60 degrees. How many degrees are we missing from the maximum of 120 degrees to the maximum that we can move the whole shoulder complex of 180? 60. So the 60 degrees of scapular rotation are coming to support the 120 of the glenohumeral motion so we can get our 180. So for us to have full range, we need that dynamic motion of the scapulothoracic articulation. Where do we get the 60 from? And where's our proximal attachment of the scapula? Where does it attach? Because, what's that? What joint? What joint is the proximal attachment? The AC. What's the maximum number of degrees of elevation we get the AC joint? 30. Parts of it. So the humeral head pushes the glenoid up, which elevates that AC joint, because that rotation here creates an elevation there. Rotate 60 degrees here, and we're going to end up getting elevation at the AC. But it only gives us 30 degrees, and so as it's maxed out, it starts lifting that clavicle. Put your hand here, abduct, and as you go up, all of a sudden you'll find, once you get over 90, that clavicle starts lifting. That's when you start getting elevation at the SC joint. You can feel the elevation pick up in the AC, and as you get past 90, you start feeling that clavicle lift, which is going to give you that 30 degrees of elevation at the SC. So I get motion here by moving things here. I get motion at the SC and the AC by pushing the humerus into the scapula to create it. So mobility in the shoulder complex starts distally and creates activity proximally. Remember, we don't have muscles that cross the SC or the AC outside of the subclavius. So we get that because we push at the end and cause it to create motion more proximal. So our stability, our ligamentous structure, starts proximal. We have a tether immediately under the costoclavicular. We have another tether distally at the corcoclavicular. We have a whole bunch of ligaments stabilized in the glenohumeral. Tether, tether, stability to make up for the fact that we're going mobile, mobile, mobile. Glenohumeral into scapulothoracic articulation, into AC, into SC. So mobility is distal to proximal. Stability is more proximal to distal. So how does this all piece together? If I stand here, the first 15 degrees of abduction is largely coming from my supraspinatus. It's firing to help kind of pull and originate that motion. Beyond that, my deltoids are kicking in. And they start taking on the bulk of that work. And they abduct. The first 30 degrees, 0 to 30, we really have just about glenohumeral motion, isolated. We don't have a lot of pressure into the scapula. Now beyond that, as we go, we end up getting 120 degrees of glenohumeral motion. We get 60 degrees of scapulothoracic rotation, scapular rotation. What's 120 divided by 60? 2. So we have a 2-to-1 ratio of glenohumeral motion to rotation in the scapula by the time we're done. And where do we get it from? Well, as we start pushing from here, from that 30 degrees up to that 90, a lot of that is coming from that 30 degrees of elevation at the AC joint. We rotate that scapula, which creates elevation at the AC. You get to 90 and you go above, and we're really kind of cranking that AC to where it's to its end point, and then we lift up the whole clavicle to then create 30 degrees of elevation at the sternoclavicular. So 30, 30 gives us the rotation possible of 60 at the scapula. And then 120 in glenohumeral gives us combined 180 for the shoulder complex. Got it? Okay, play with that tonight. Because if you don't take the time to walk through it, you're not going to hold on to those details. Because that gets to be kind of complex. So go find somebody, a roommate, a child. Probably ask mom or dad first, like, hey, don't mind me, I'm just going to talk to your kid for a second, my shoulders. Don't be that creepy. All right, so talk somebody through it. Explain it to them. Where you stumble in your explanation is where you have a gap in your understanding. Cool. Awesome. Go fill that gap. Figure it out. But seek to find your gaps so that you know what you need to work on. You know what you need to understand. If you wait till tomorrow, if you sleep without going over this again, it won't be there. And we'll have this loving video for all to enjoy. You can reference things again. But you will do yourself a great service to be able to refresh this afternoon, this evening, before you go to sleep, so it's there, so it's anchored, so it stays. Good? And for the work that we did on Monday that didn't get studied, didn't get prepped, go do it. This weekend, be experts in all things shoulder by the time I see you again Monday, because there will be a quiz, as always. But the bigger point is that you own that knowledge and aren't so scared of it going into the test. Good to go? It's so good to see you all. What's that? Oh. It's like the day before the drop date.
I know.
It's on the syllabus. You pull that up, it's all there, it's all story.
And it's on April 25th.
A month. A month. You have so many class days to get through, that's awesome.
Is the other video on Monday's video? You can't hear me.
Oh, I can hear you.
Oh,
I'm
is the other?
answering your question.
Oh, you heard me beforehand. So it's not posted on Blackboard or on YouTube.
Not yet. So, hold on.
Yep. Yay!
Hi.
Hi.
I'm trying to figure out how to stop recording.